Index podcast is brought to you by our staking partner, Marinade Finance. Their latest release, Marinade Select, offers a smarter way to stake, featuring a curated set of high-performing mid-size validators handpicked for yield, professionalism, and their role in making Solana faster and more resilient. Learn more and start staking at marinade.finance. Hey everybody, welcome to the Index, and I'm your host Alex Kehaya, and today I'm excited to be joined by Archie, who's the co-founder of LayerLens. LayerLens is an AI evaluation company building a platform to create, run, and execute benchmarks on foundational models. Archie, super excited to have you on the show and to learn more about what you guys are building.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. I'm super excited to dive in.
So just to start out, I would love to know why you get out of bed in the morning every day. This is something I ask every founder who comes out of the show on the show to build what you're doing. Why does this matter to you? What's driving you to build LayerLens?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So initially, my background is in I've been in crypto / blockchain since probably 2018, 2019, when I was still in high school actually. And sort of when like Bitcoin sort of just went off the rails and was, everyone was talking about it, became sort of this national phenomenon. And that sort of interest followed me into college, where I was going to Georgia Tech, and I took a master's level class in cryptography my freshman year to sort of learn the thesis behind why these, how these technologies work that we use, in the crypto community. And in 2021, ended up really sort of falling in love with this idea of the decentralized internet, right? So how, the not just the sort of financial side of crypto or the financial side of Web3, but so the inner philosophy, right? That it inspired, the cypherpunk movement that initially gave rise to Bitcoin in the first place. And that sort of followed me. I had a couple of projects here and there, including doing some work in DAO infrastructure. I founded an L1 that was focused on developer infra, making it easier for developers to build blockchains more effectively, or build blockchain-based applications more effectively. And but really the core thesis that stuck with me this entire time is this idea of making it easier for people to use and leverage decentralized technologies in their day-to-day lives. And when the generative AI boom sort of happened in 2023, obviously me being a Web3 crypto guy, I hadn't followed it as closely. So I decided to, once ChatGPT came out towards the end of 2022 and throughout 2023, I sort of followed it extremely closely. And when, eventually realized that, this stack needs to be decentralized, right? Like the entire AI stack is very centralized. It's, a lot of it is, if you really believe in this idea that, AGI, where artificial generalized intelligence is going to really be a thing 10, 15, 20 years from now, or maybe even 5 years from now, in an ideal world, it's happening in a decentralized way. And really evals and benchmarking is one of those things where I was like, we can, the team and I were like, we can do this today, right? We don't need to wait for, Web3 to catch up. We don't need to wait for decentralized technology and infrastructure to catch up to Web2 in order to do this, right? So one of the few principles in that we need to do it. And that's sort of why, this problem was so motivating, was this is one of the first ways in which we can truly decentralize the AI stack.
So it sounds like your motivation is about decentralizing the AI stack. Walk me through. Well, first of all, just at a high level, I really share your thesis, and we've been talking about this a lot on the show for like over a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years now. And over that time, we've kind of honed it down to really one phrase: open intelligence. Mm-hmm. Open intelligence is open source AGI and ASI on crypto rails, and I believe it's existential. I've said it on every single episode, especially when we have like a lot of AI companies coming on these days, and it's very cool to hear that you guys are working on a part of that stack. And at a high level, I understand that there's like a factory system for making AGI, right? There's inputs and outputs, and then there's different components that you need to piece together, different pieces of infrastructure, different pieces like protocols and processes that you need. And then and it spans from the LLMs and the data and the training and the inference and all the hardware and software required to do that, all the way up to the application layer where you've got, use cases that drive an economy that fund all that stuff. Because, crypto is cool because you can bootstrap things with speculation, but at the end of the day, you need to build something that's actually useful that generates real economic value, right? Like Solana is one of the few blockchains that generates real economic value. And I think that open intelligence has a very good chance of creating real economic value in the trillions of dollars. And is meaningful for the human race.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't have it, then we have some very few centralized actors that control. Like calling it a powerful technology is like an understatement. It's not even, I'm not really sure. It's like a whole new paradigm of capability, I think, that we're going to see. So I would like to hear from you, broad strokes. What is the factory? Like, what are the components that you think need to exist for open intelligence to succeed? I think we were talking about the same thing. And you are way deeper in this than I am, is from a technology standpoint. So what are the components, and then where does your component fit in? And how is it decentralized? How does it help accelerate us to a future where we do have open intelligence?
Yeah, so maybe I can give a little bit of context behind how LayerLens was formed and like the thesis behind that to sort of illustrate this idea. So, in 2024, I was sort of getting into different AI projects, and actually, just through various coincidences of like, I knew Jesus Rodriguez was the founder of Into the Block, which is now Centaura. It's a massive DeFi company doing essentially ML allocations, using ML to make allocations from institutional finance into DeFi, right? So they can, like, a very, income and currency rich and economically rich part of the crypto market, and used AI to create an actual use case. But Jesus' background is real as a computer scientist. He, in the early 2000s, led the implementation at Microsoft, was a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, and led the implementation of what's now Azure. And then has stints as a quantitative trader at DRW, very interesting background, has co-founded several technology companies, and has recently been incubating Web3 AI projects. You mentioned me, I mean, probably the best mind in Web3 AI that I've come across, right? In terms of being deep in this space and being able to know these technologies at a fundamental level. And he's been incubating several Web3 AI projects, one in agents, one in doing decentralized models. And he was actually the one who came to me with this idea in the beginning of 2024. Among all the stacks of AGI, we have people trying to do decentralized training. We have people trying to do, obviously, decentralized compute, right? So, and people trying to do decentralized data collection. And really no one was addressing decentralized evaluation and benchmarking, right? So the entire thesis came around being, how can we use blockchain technology to create better, more practical evals for generalized AI systems, right? So whether they're Web2, whether they're Web3, wherever they are, how can we use blockchain technology to create better evaluation data sets and evals and benchmarks for really everyone? And if you look, to answer your question, if you look at sort of the open intelligence stack that you described, you have data, right? Which is like, okay, how do we source the data that's actually being used to train these models? You have the compute, right? Like what hardware and where is the hardware being sourced? I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in that space, right? You have companies like, I think, Prime Intellect and others who are trying to accelerate that part of the process. You have training, which is, okay, how do we take the data? How do we take the compute? And how do we create a neural network or a transformer or a model? And you have some companies, I think, Nose, among others, trying to do that. And
Pluralis,
yes,
has been shipping some pretty interesting research on that. And I was lucky to get Alexander Long on my show back when it was just him at Pluralis, which was super cool. And it's one of the things I really respect about Jake Berkman from CoinFund backed them when it was just him, which is pretty incredible to see the results of that coming out. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So that's part, sort of the second part of the second, and the final is inference, right? So so once you build a model, how do you serve it? And there's other projects doing stuff in that space, and then obviously we're sort of doing post training, post fine tuning, all of that, post compute. How can you evaluate and benchmark the model to see how good it is at a particular task. So those are sort of all the different aspects of the stack. Some of them are very hardware intensive, right? Decentralized journey requires, as you mentioned, very innovative technologies like what Polaris is working on, what Gnosis is working on, right? Like being able to create better methods to aggregate compute over from a lot of different data centers to create AI models that rival or can match what what the traditional companies and labs are doing. And you also have inference, right? So being able to serve, finished models over a decentralized interface. And for us, we're focusing specifically on the aspect of evals, which is, okay, how can we create tests, essentially, right? The prompts that effectively challenge foundational models in specific categories. And the way we're doing that is we're doing two things. One is we're using blockchain technology to decentralize the execution of these evals, right? So being able to actually source evaluations, not just from one centralized party, but source results from an entire distributed network. And the second is one that we're exploring is how we actually create them for more practical use cases.
And the benchmarking matters for a lot of reasons, right? Like I could just think of like in the use case of an AI agent that's trying to use different LLMs to get jobs done. Like obviously it has its own base LLM that it's using to come up with whatever its logic is, but you could see a world where they're all communicating with other LLMs too to get other things that are specialized. And they would want to evaluate which one to use, right? And so this would be a method for that. And then the other one that I'm aware of is Bagel Network. So I don't know if you've looked into Bagel Network, but they have their ZK LoRa tech, which is the proof of the contributions based on how much it's been improved. And they could use your method as one of the methods that they then combine with their proof, their ZK LoRa, as a benchmark, right? So you can have multiple different benchmarks. And then there's the other one. What are those guys called? Alora, I want to say. Right? That's another where it's a bunch of LLMs talking to each other, right? And like self-improving each other based on the consensus of so I can see a lot of places where this gets really interesting. But I'm curious, when we were talking before the show, I asked you who your customers were. And I want to see how this ties in because you rattle off some pretty big, like consulting type firms that are systems integrators. And I wonder what the value prop is for them and if it's the same things that I just said or if it's different things. But yeah, can you educate me on that?
Yeah, so we have some early design customers that we worked with, right? So that are sort of across the field, like startups, enterprises. But I think the consistent theme is they're all looking for two things, right? One is, okay, how do we select the best vendor or the best model for our particular use case, right? So it's like, okay, there's so many different AI models out there right now, open source, closed source, models coming from China, fine-tuned versions of those models. All the big sort of frontier labs in the United States from, obviously OpenAI, Anthropic, XAI, and Google DeepMind. So how do we select the best model for a particular use case, right? And then how do we go from sort of, okay, we have generalized benchmarks that these model frontier labs release, and okay, let's rerun those just to make sure that those are verified. But then second, how do we go from that to creating evaluation that actually match our specific use case, right? Stuff that isn't how good is a model doing on an international mathematical Olympiad question, but okay, how good is it at SQL, or how good is it at Python, or something very specific to my use case?
Oh, interesting.
Being able to run that, right? Because most of the benchmarks you see today are very like intelligence heavy, right? They're like, okay, can we showcase how they're very academic, right? Like, how can we showcase how good this model does on this very academic task, like math or generalized programming or like college level or graduate level, questions or like.
You're more focused on like jobs to be done.
Exactly.
Right. So people want
exactly. So we support those.
It's more practical, right? Like that's at the end. I've been thinking about this a lot because of I mentioned it again before, but we're bringing the X402 standard to Solana, which is the HTTP payment required standard that Coinbase released, and we're doing open source with them and a few other core contributors. And I've been thinking about the paradigm shift here as we shift towards agents with wallets that users are using. They don't care about APIs or the performance of LLMs or any of this technical stuff. They care about getting a job done, and they're willing to pay for it.
Right.
And it's really interesting when you start thinking about that from that perspective, right? And up until now, things have been very academic, very research heavy, very theory heavy until, maybe like whenever OpenAI kind of blew up, right? And then now it's like a race to like real use cases. Mm-hmm. And, GPT is like generally useful, right? But it doesn't do things for you necessarily. I mean, it can write things, but it can't like post it for you. Can't make applications for you. Codex can though. Right. And, what if Codex could dynamically switch models and pay for those models via API, via HTTP, right? And so it would pay your API to get the information it needs to choose how to get the job done. So does your service integrate with MCP too then? So that like kind of can help route? Like I see yours is like kind of a routing the routing technology is a little bit different, but it's an evaluation like, hey, there's all these models that are in LayerLens's wheelhouse in their APIs or whatever that I can now see the information I want to see. What else is involved in there in helping it get access to the right thing,
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now we focused exclusively on like automated execution of benchmarks and evals against models. But that is definitely an interesting direction. It's something that we've been looking into is like how do we actually get agentic evals done that where you have multiple orchestration metrics, right? You have one model doing a specific task, you have another model. But really all an agent is it's a model with a wide set of tools available for it. So recently we onboarded this thing called multi-turn evaluations, which are essentially like simulating an entire sort of toolkit and library for a model to interact with and seeing how well it does on different conversational inputs. So the first multi-turn benchmark we onboarded is called TileBench, which is measuring how well a model can act as an airline agent representative, right? So the model has access to all of these different tools like, being able to refer to someone's username, being able to change their booking information. And then it gets fed with these tasks, but okay, I'm customer XYZ. I want to change my booking from this day to this day. I want to change my destination from this to this day. And the model has to access this database, make the appropriate calls. And then this evaluation actually checks if that task was done successfully. Like, was the customer able to get the refund? Was the customer able to change whatever booking they had? So that's sort of the first like multi-turn agentic evaluation we onboarded recently. So if you go, our app is actually live. So we launched our application, the public version of our benchmarking application, which is essentially a public good. It's available to anyone for free. You have to create a free account. If you go to app.layerlens.ai, that's sort of the URL, you can see all these different benchmarks across different sort of more traditional academic benchmarks, which we have run independently. And then also some of these more specific use case specific benchmarks. And essentially our idea there is like the next phase of our product is, okay, how can we take this technology and this analytics platform that we've built for AI models, apply them to user-specific tasks, as you mentioned, user-specific jobs, user-specific agent orchestration mechanisms, and now allow them to see how well that's doing before they use it or before they deploy it to production.
Yeah, super interesting. And so it sounds like you guys are still pretty early though in the discovery of like product market fit. Like you're working with some design customers, you're figuring out the right model. Like am I hitting that correctly, or how are things going on that front?
Yeah, so we've I think the key product market fit is definitely an overloaded term. I think the key thing is like we're actually actively talking to customers, right? The one of the things with Gen AI, especially with so the stack, and this applies to whether you're doing this in Web 2, Web 3, any part of the stack, is extremely difficult to, because even in a lot of cases, customers don't know what they want, right? Users don't know what they want. Your users may not know what they want. So it's a lot of user discovery, and it's a lot of sort of thinking independently and trying to think of, as you mentioned, like an agentic evaluation, or what does that look like? It's a lot of experimentation there. So, we got started in September. We've been around for 8 months. We spent the first half of sort of the last of that period building a product, and now we're doing a lot of user iteration, user feedback, and getting input on how the next phase of the product would go. So yeah, we're early, but I think we've accumulated again, knock on wood, we've accumulated a good amount of traction so far with regards to actually getting people who are interested in using this, right? And now the question is, okay, how much, how will they become actual customers? What will it take? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, that's always a tricky chasm to cross, step to cross. But it does sound like what you're building is generally useful, and you're working in the right space. Like, you guys are definitely going to discover something that's quite valuable if you just keep building and shipping and experimenting, for sure. Tell me about your team.
Yeah, so our team is we have 15 people. We're fully remote, so we're all over the place. As modern day internet companies are. I mentioned Moses Rodriguez was my co-founder and sort of partner of this. He incubated the company and essentially brought it to life, had the idea. And but one of the other co-founders is Ram, who has a background in the traditional ML testing space. And we sort of were like, okay, this is Gen AI, so let's use that customers. And he's leading our strategy, go to market, all the customers and sort of design customers. He's been leading sales and BD there. And we have a strong development team, with backgrounds in Open Zeppelin, University of California, Consensus, and sort of all over the place. That sort of we've where we're sort of some of my personal people I've worked with in the past who I sort of recruited. And it's a very ragtag team, but I think we're all sort of committed to this mission. And again, so this idea of even in generative AI, forget Web3, or even in generative AI, the idea is very new. And if you think about how the idea of blockchain technology meshes in, it's something completely out of left field. So it's something very interesting that I think has attracted the right kind of people. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but we have built the back end of this infrastructure on EigenLayer. So the entire infrastructure, where if you go to app.layerlens.ai, the public benchmarks that you see in the open are all being executed by an EigenLayer AVS. And that is so that's EigenLayer has been a great partner for us as well in helping us get that the Web3 blockchain technology part of the stack figured out.
Yeah, can you explain that to me a little bit more? Like, and I might have missed it from earlier, but why does it need EigenLayer and blockchain at all? Like, how does that work in the system?
Yes. So essentially, when you look at it, so whenever you see a new model being released, right? So say it's 04, 03, or maybe, Grok's new, Grok 2, Grok 3, whatever. You see a set of benchmarks, right? They attach a set of benchmarks to the model reports. And right now, all those benchmarks are coming from the creators themselves, right? Or maybe you have some open source alternatives, but in that case, you have to trust that A, those open source leaderboards will keep up, and then B, you have to trust the creators, right? You don't have any access to the compute, or you have no access to validate that, hey, this is actually how well the model did on this particular graph. I just have to take this at face value. So the entire idea of using blockchain technology here is, how can we decentralize that part of the aspect to where someone consuming this data, right? So someone coming to a platform and saying, okay, Claude 4 Sonnet is the best at programming based on this benchmark, doesn't just have to take us at face value. They don't have to take the model creators themselves at face value. It's really, they get to see this entire sort of, they get to see that the results completely from, they trust a group of nodes who are crypto-economically incentivized to execute these evaluations correctly, right? And because we use blockchain technology, we can actually provide an entire list of every single input within the benchmark, right? So an example is, there's a benchmark called Math, which is a collection of international mathematical Olympiad questions. And traditionally, you'll just see, okay, Grok 3 scored at 92% on this benchmark. Okay, cool, that's it. On our platform, you see, okay, Grok 3 scored at 92%, but here's every single question and every single answer from Grok and the correct answer and whether they got it right or wrong. And this was calculated by someone who is completely neutral, credibly neutral, right? Because they're incentivized to be credibly neutral, and it's not gaming the evaluation in any way. So that's the first use case that we've built right now. But as far as like the second use case, which we think is a lot more interesting, is how can we leverage blockchain technology to create new, more practical evaluations? That's really the sort of the fundamental problem that I think we're trying to solve here is obviously now we provide a way to execute existing evaluations, but the fundamental problem is how can we create new evals, right? And that's where sort of the community momentum that we know is inherent in Web3 will play a large role, is our thesis.
See, developers will make new evals for like the example you used earlier about the flight customer service for a flight, right?
Exactly.
Well, I think that's super interesting because there's going to be so many agents out there, and especially once they start sending money around at the speed of light, server to server, you want to make sure it's correct, right? Like
exactly. And the thing is, you don't have to be a developer.
For whatever job it is.
Yeah, the thing is, you don't have to be a developer. You can be someone who knows a lot about a specific topic, right? So maybe you can be an accountant, and you're like, okay, I know a lot about accounting. I want to contribute a new eval about accounting, right? Because I know some very specific tasks that I know models can't solve. So let me contribute that as a test.
How would an accountant do that doesn't know how to write code? Like, how do they do you guys have like a UI or something?
Exactly. That's something that's what we're looking into. And the entire idea is a benchmark fundamentally is a list of questions and a list of answers and a way to compare the answer from the model to the ground truth, which is essentially what is the correct answer. So as long as you can, supply that, like theoretically, we should be able to take care of the rest. So that's what we think the network effects that are inherent in Web3 will be really helpful in helping us create practical evals. Because the problem right now is a lot of the models are scoring really well on the traditional evaluations. So everyone is saying, oh yeah, we're close to AGI, where we have 2 years until AI takes all of our jobs, right? But the reality is, we may be, we're probably a lot further than that, because in practice, as you and I know, like these models are not that good at doing real world tasks, right? They can't, jump in there and make posts for you, as you said, or make payments for you yet, right? And they
dude, Codex is getting pretty good. I've been using it to vibe code stuff, and it's kind of
it is. I'm providing code to this for sure, but there's a lot of I think the general thesis is there's a lot of stuff behind that we need to build accurate tests for, right? Like, how good is this really? So that's the entire point. Is like how do we build more practical evals? And that's sort of that's what we think using blockchain technology and Web3 and the network effects inherent there will enable us to do that.
So I always ask this at the end of the show. We're getting towards the top of the show, but what have I not asked you that I should have asked, or that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, I don't have it. Is there any particular topic you want to go into? I think we've covered every. I think this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And is there anything specific you wanted to ask? Maybe from
well, actually, one question I had is about open source. Like, how much of your stack is open source? What do you think about that? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so our stack right now, obviously, we're building a lot on using public benchmarks. So the scoring scripts and how those public benchmarks are sourced are all open. They're all taken from public data. So that part of that is open source. We're trying to figure out how we open source other parts of stack, obviously, while maintaining, any customer related data that we may have. So that's like how those evals are being executed. So that's the
software and scripts should all be open source, right? Like
that's our goal. Yeah, that's our goal.
It'd be really easy because like the data, obviously, you want to protect that. And I feel like Bagel has some tech that is also open source around that.
So for us, so much of it is data, though. So but we're actively looking to open source as a part of our stack. Definitely anything related to the blockchain aspect, I think, on the Web3 aspect will be 100%. And the verifiability, right, to making sure that we're actually executing this code and
looking at the code and trusting it, and the community can kind of contribute to it. And as far as like how to do it, I mean, it's pretty easy. You just put a license on there, right?
Exactly.
GPL.
GPL.
No, dude. GPL. That's what my business partner wrote the GPL licenses.
Oh, nice.
And he's the author of Bash.
Nice.
Was always pushing GPL.
Awesome.
The reason I like that is because they, especially for things that are infrastructure, they can't be closed source forked. Like it stays open source in perpetuity for the community, and it's a public good.
Right. No, and that is what our public application right now. It's a public good, right? It's public. It's a completely free to use. So yes, I think that's something we'll move towards.
And if you're worried about like integration partners, there are other versions of the GPL, like the LGPL, that are better suited for that. If they're like, we have some big enterprise that kind of their legal is like, mad at just like vanilla GPL, then you can find ways around it. But happy to talk to you more about that later.
Yeah, that'd be lit.
So, well, look, thanks so much for coming on. I think what you guys are doing is super cool, and I look forward to seeing it progress.
Yeah. So just as a shameless plug, you can learn more at LayerLens.ai. And there you'll be able to find the link to the app, which is just app.layerlens.ai. You can find us on Twitter. I think Alice rated in the comments below, but it's at LayerLens AI is the Twitter and _AI. And yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Talk to you soon.
Yep.